My name's Parminder Singh. I'm the founding commentator for Hockey Night in Canada Punjabi edition with the CBC. Then I ventured off, did some basketball, and became the first Punjabi commentator for the NBA in Punjabi. I think it's been interesting because the NBA and with the diverse players to embrace the game, and we've had great players from Africa, from China, Yao Min, even India, and you have Satnam Singh, you have Sim Pular. So having players from diverse backgrounds has really kind of helped and launched the NBA into being in diverse communities. Now, let me tell you one thing, which I think is quite key, because the Raptors, I also feel, played a huge role in the NBA and the diversity of its fan base. So they seeing the types of faces that you did when the Raptors were in the playoffs, and this I'm going back to even with the Vince Carter days that or even earlier the Damon Stoudemire when the team was first there, that you did a pan of the stadium and you saw a lot of diversity with the Raptors games. And that resonated well. And I think, when it came to the NBA has done such a great job in reaching out to communities. The NBA broadcast is done in over 100 different languages. And I think, this is why the NBA has done such a great job. They're on different platforms, reaching out to various communities. And not to mention just the access to the game. We're limited with hockey for countries in the colder temperate, that ensuring that there's ice, you can play hockey on the pond for those who don't have access to arenas. So I think whereas with the NBA you just need a hoop, any makeshift hoop, as Dr. James Naismith, the great Canadian who founded the game, it was peach baskets they cut out, and that's precisely it. Just a basketball and a hoop, anything that you could throw a ball into, and you've got a great game of basketball going. Certainly, I think access to the game is very important, and even this day and age, just to look at ice time, how expensive it's become, and just during COVID time, obviously these rules may not apply as everything was shut down, but pre-COVID, and I'm particularly post-COVID, it would potentially be the same. In order to get cheap ice time, anybody who wants to play hockey, you're looking at kind of the late hours at night or even early hours in the morning. It's like 12 to 2 a.m. And that's what I know my friends are used to when they call me out to a good game of shinny, that it's really late at night because of affordability. And so I think there's a lot when it comes to protecting the game and allowing that access to the game. Equipment is very costly, and ensuring that kids, especially young kids from lower income families, and I myself, I grew up with immigrant parents who couldn't afford to buy me hockey equipment, and even getting me skates was a huge investment for them, and that was my initial experience of playing hockey. Luckily, being in the Toronto District School Board, our school had that lend a skate program. So we had this room where skates for kids like me who didn't have parents who could afford them a pair of skates, with the growing shoe sizes every year. And we were able to rely on that loaner program to get that firsthand experience on being on ice. So that barrier to entry, I think, is very important. And we really need to understand and accept that this is the case. And and I've pushed this even at a government and policies level, that this great Canadian game that we have of hockey, you need government support, you need private support. You need the MLSE to make games cheaper so that people can actually go and attend it with their families. But I think so. All these factors do play a big role, and it does become a game for, unfortunately, the elite, and the ones who are making those sacrifices truly are. And I give it to those families and parents who have put their kids, into hockey, and believe me, it's tough for them to make ends meet. So we really need to figure this out. Otherwise, you're going to have this huge shift, which we've already had. That a lot of people are shifting to sports that are cheaper. Absolutely, absolutely. Just in basketball, it's just there's far more avenues and areas where there's room for inclusivity. You have folks who are heavily vested, and now I'm talking about my initial days with moving from hockey to basketball, and I go back to 2009. The first time we called a Raptors game in Punjabi, and it's interesting that to promote the game in Punjabi, that I had spoken to the marketing department with the Raptors and said, "Listen, guys, we got to advertise on Facebook." And it's funny because they had never advertised on Facebook before. This was actually something new, and they're like, "Okay, well, how much is that going to cost us?" And I was like, "Well, give me a budget of like maybe $200, I think, because back then advertising on Facebook was pretty cheap." And we became the first. So when the first Raptors game happened in Punjabi, we advertised it on Facebook. We put in all the parameters on the type of audience we want to hit, link up, Punjabi speaking, their background, age, demographic, and so forth. And this was like, it was a very cool thing, and that I can say that we helped launch advertising on a social media platform. But the moves that the NBA has made, and we're talking about, things such as Twitch now. You name the platform, and it looks like the NBA is right there, and they're always looking at different ways of targeting market and the changing dynamics of today's viewership, and how they can reach out to that area, that segment of the population. And there was a huge kind of a welcoming atmosphere. And hockey at times kind of feels like the old boys club, where you have like these certain legendary individuals that you always looked up to, and believe me, which I did as well. It's and which was fantastic. But uh but then you look at the Raptors, and if you've been to any of the games, you can see the difference. With the Raps, obviously you need the boards in hockey. It's protection and the netting and so forth. But it almost becomes like a reflection of how much there is separation between the elite and those who can afford and not. So I think there's a lot of work that hockey needs to do in terms of reaching out to a diverse community. Stuff that the NBA has been doing. Our great global ambassador is Nav Bhatia, right? And then you see a guy who's got a turban and he's there at every single game, and that's like, man, that's diversity. And it's things like that are so important. And I think that making these inroads, getting the new communities on board with hockey, having players go out. I know it's a toll with the amount of physical pressure that a player has when they're playing hockey or any sport. But each organization, I think, needs to mandate that you need to be out into these high needs communities, into the new immigrant population, to engage them. Because as a kid, and if you ever meet a professional player, I think these are like superheroes to you. And the more access they have to you as a superhero, the more they're going to keep connected. And I grew up where there were, the Raptors had just come about, and my superheroes were the hockey players, right? And until I went to my first Raptors game, and then my second and third, because it was so much cheaper. You could get tickets for like under $10 to go watch a Raptors game back in the day, right? And the Leafs even back then were very expensive to go watch. So I think these are real concerns that hockey is faced with, and they need to ensure that there are faces that reflect what the changing dynamics of the audience is. So that's very important. For me personally, I've always been the person who stands out, whether it's in the room or in the classroom. I went to a school where I was the only turbaned kid in the entire school, with a handful of immigrant students and so forth. So facing kind of that, racial discrimination when I grew up was always there. And I think, one thing my parents kind of taught me, with them being new to Canada, is, you can't take that personally. You need to educate. And I think at that point, that was important to me. So, even as a kid, I think it's difficult to kind of take on that ownership of, why do I need to educate other individuals? Why can't they just accept me for who I am? And those challenges do exist even today, whether it's race, whether it's gender, your orientation, and teaching that to young kids. I think it's always a challenge. And so now, you can imagine me as a kid, and I had faced all these challenges up until my professional career. And I think even till this day on, that to, whether it's the only kid in the classroom who looks like me, or being the only person in the locker room who looks like me, and then I'm asking questions. And then, most of these players who've never seen a Sikh Punjabi person, the first thing they wonder is, this guy can speak English? Like, it's unfortunately, that's the type of uh, disconnect that exists. And so I think, it's really interesting that I've had this opportunity to not only do what I love, but to educate. And then with the education comes the unity, and then you unite, that regardless of what I look like, we've got the similar passions in the sport. We love the game, and we've got this common goal. And I think having some of those barriers, and just opening players up. It wasn't too long ago that players were struggling with their own kind of orientation and sexual orientation, that the NHL was like so hesitant to talk about. So you can just imagine, you had this kind of great AIDS debate, if there was ever such a thing, with Magic Johnson in the NBA. So you have this superstar elite athlete who came down with who contracted AIDS, and now you had this whole league talking about it. Players were scared to play with him, that, oh my God, am I going to catch? But there was this education aspect that went into it. So, sometimes it's these kind of issues that happen in real life that come on to sports. And hockey has done a great job of sheltering a lot of this. And I think what's really needed is, no, you got to talk about these things. And I think only then do we get players involved, because then you have coaches who are gonna, like Brian Burke started talking about his own son's experience, with the way he felt that his son was left out. And now you have individuals who are in these certain platforms, who can be a voice, and start creating inroads, especially in a sport that has been so protected. And I think, so looking at, how important it is to teach the gender and racial equality, I think it's very important. We shy away from this, masculinity culture, which is very toxic in sports. It's, yes, you want the athlete to play at a very elite level, but then we have this false disconnect of connecting it to some, machismo, masculine, this culture, which becomes detrimental, not only to the person, but to the sport. And that's what we've kind of seen. It's, any sports with a lot of physicality and physical play, such as hockey or even football, that you have this culture which becomes very toxic. And I don't think the two are, the two can be mutually exclusive. You don't need this toxic culture to be able to play at a high level. And I think that's what's important, is teaching that at a very young age. And we need that in the programs. The coaches at a young age need to be talking about this. Like, we've got the first black line in hockey, 3 black players, and it hasn't happened since like the 1940s, I think. How crazy is that it took us that long to put together a lineup of black athletes in hockey? And we know, African American Canadians, or just black athletes in general, excel in a lot of sports. But yet when it comes to hockey, they're faced with so much racism. This is ridiculous. Will Reed, one of the great Canadian black hockey players, I think individuals like him have done a lot, but there's still a lot more to do. And hockey needs to get it right, and they need to get it right at a very young age. And when it comes to basketball as well, I think and talking about barrier to entry, and I think it ties in so well. When you have a lot of individuals who can have access to play the game, you generally will have more people playing the game, and I think that's what we've seen in basketball, and hence why you have a um, great mix of players, and then the NBA just has great execs around who love the sport. And mind you, and I talk about pushing hockey, and the Punjabi broadcast itself. Joel Darling actually was the VP senior producer when he started Hockey Night in Punjabi, and when he had hired me. And this was the vision of Joel. And Joel is a male Caucasian producer in the CBC, and it's individuals or leaders, I guess, who have that kind of a diverse vision is what's needed. And that's the only way to make the change. Is people who are in a position to do so need to recognize and to be able to make these changes and hire the right people. And I think that's what the NBA has been doing, where the NHL has been lacking. It's leadership. I think that's what it comes down to. So when I talk about hockey as being a old, this kind of a old men's club type of scenario, it's because you see it's a recycling of the same people. First, they're players, they become coaches, they become GMs, they become presidents. It's the same, circulation of the similar culture. I think this is where change needs to be. Like in the NBA, you've got you're the first woman to be an assistant coach, and with the Sacramento Kings, I believe. And so it's things like this. It's why don't we have that within the NHL, right? We had a female goalie, and back in the day, and the amount of hate that she faced at that point to push herself into the game, into the NHL. And um, but it comes down to leadership. I think it's very important that you have the right leadership who see what the future, not only of the sport, but how the greater culture is shifting and moving. And if you can't plug yourself in, regardless of what sport you are, in this case we highlight hockey, if you can't plug yourself into that, you will become a sport of the past, unfortunately. So I think the best way to do it is get great leadership who could recognize the need for diversity, need for inclusivity, but then that accountability and is key. And that's the only way to do it. Is you need to have the people, as we mentioned, the people who are in a position to be able to make the change need to be able to do that. Being diverse, being inclusive, but then being accountable. So I think for me, each team, each hockey NHL team, or what we see even within basketball, they have these leadership roles which are focused on inclusivity and diversity, and to give them more of the ability to make those changes is important. It's one thing to just create a role and not allow them any power to actually make real change, but then in order to be able to make those real change, you need to ensure that you provide that opportunity for those leaders. So I think here, having diverse leaders, getting GMs, getting creative about who's going to be a GM, who has understanding of hockey, but then of course, getting involved and what their background is in terms of inclusivity. And until we do that, I don't believe it is going to happen. And here it has to be a top-down approach. It's we look at what the grassroots wants, and then what the those sitting in the ivory tower cannot see. I think that's the unfortunate situation here, is being in tune with what your viewership, the direction of viewership is going into. And we saw this with the Raptors when they won the championship, the parade, the folks who were in Jurassic Park, and I give it to the great leadership. and the diversity of the game. So this is important, and it's from every angle. You can look at this from ticket sales to coaching to the makeup of your team to, whichever angle you want to look at. That if you are to apply these principles and ask yourself as a leader or a GM that, these decisions that we're making, is it making us more accountable, more diverse, more inclusive? I think that's a great start, great beginning to ensure that any sport, and in this case, particularly hockey, can ensure that they have a growing viewership. Otherwise, there's a lot of lost opportunity here.